Oh, can't wait till I don't have to do that anymore.
Well, that was a movie.
Hello and welcome back to Simon's Rants. I'm Simon, and today I just saw The Wrath of Man, which is the new Guy Ritchie film starring Jason Statham. And it's interesting that we got another Guy Ritchie movie so soon after getting our last one, but it's because his last film, The Gentleman, was delayed so long because of COVID that it only became like 8 months in between the two movies. So I feel like I just reviewed a Guy Ritchie movie, and here I am reviewing another one, and I have a lot of the same things to say about it because it's in that same brand of Guy Ritchie. For those of you who aren't aware of the Guy Ritchie tropes, he has a very unique style that he uses in the majority of his movies. He did stray away from it for a short time with movies like Aladdin, but all of his good movies, for lack of a better way to say it, but that's what it is his good movies are in this unique style where there's very fast talking, there's a lot of quick dialogue, and these very stylized action sequences, interesting plot points that happen very quickly but are mainly kind of just convoluted, but not in a bad way. It's like the plots aren't necessarily complicated, but how it's told is very quick and very witty, and that can make it seem like it's a lot more complicated than it actually is. I talked about that in The Gentleman, which isn't his best movie, but I did say it was his fourth best movie in my opinion. I would put the top four as Snatch, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. You could probably interchange that however you want, but those are easily his two best. Ask anyone, that's what everybody says. And then Sherlock Holmes at number 3, and then The Gentleman at number 4. And now for this new one, it's in the same category as The Gentleman. It's not the best he's ever done, but it is a return to form for him because all of those movies were a while ago, especially Lock, Stock, and Smoking Barrels and Snatch. Those were his earliest films. Sherlock Holmes was a little bit later in 2009, but from 2009 until last year with The Gentleman, he hadn't done anything that was considered very good. And if honestly you go by Metascore, you go by Metacritic, he hasn't actually made really that many good movies, if any at all. He's more of a director for the people, a director for the average audience than he is for critics. Critics don't seem to like him, and I certainly know why. But he does have a return to form these past couple of years in making movies that, even though critics still won't love it, this one, at last I checked, only has a 57%. So critics didn't love this. Audiences are enjoying it. It currently has like a 7.4 or something like that on IMDb. Before I get too far into this review though, I should give a basic synopsis of this movie in case you don't know. So, in case you don't know, the plot of this film follows Jason Statham's character who joins an armored car division. They transport money from location to location in armored cars, and he is a security guard working for them that prevents the money from being stolen. But Jason Statham's character seems to be more than what he's letting on. He seems to be more than what's just on the surface. He seems to have extreme technical skill and fighting ability with weapons, and we don't really know who he is, and I will get more into how this plot develops as it goes, but that's more for spoilers, so I'll get into that later in the spoiler section. For now, I'm just going to give a basic review, and that is this. I have a lot of the same basic issues that I had with The Gentleman as I have with this, and that's the beginning of this movie is really hard to get into. And I made the same mistake of assuming that the beginning of the movie was going to represent how I felt about the totality of the movie, because it's really bad. It really is bad, but then the movie picks up and gets a lot better maybe 40 minutes in, maybe a little bit later. I wasn't really tracking it. I did watch it in the theater, so I couldn't exactly check how far we were into the movie, but it does start really poorly. And the biggest reason is the writing and the acting are just flat out atrocious. Like I said, Jason Statham is the main character. I think it's fairly well known that he's not going to win an Oscar anytime soon for acting, but he was, of the dominant characters that we saw, he was the best actor, and it wasn't even really close. Realistically speaking, the best actor in this movie was actually probably Eddie Marsan, and he was in the beginning of this movie. He was in it throughout, but he didn't do a lot, so it was hard to really say that he was redeeming the acting quality of this movie because he was barely in it. And for those first 40 minutes, or however long that section was, Jason Statham was the best actor. And then the second one was probably Post Malone. Honestly, yes, Post Malone was in this movie for a very short section, and he was probably, other than Jason Statham and Eddie Marsan, he was probably the best actor in that section. The acting quality was atrocious, and the dialogue was awful. I said in my review of The Gentleman, if you haven't seen that, you should check it out. But there's just so many lines that are so awfully written that you would need a great actor or just somebody badass like Jason Statham to say them to make them sound okay at all. So when Jason Statham is saying it, you can get away with some of them, but some of them are just too bad for even him to handle. And then the other actors, whether they're good or not, just can't seem to do it. They were so wooden. They were so stiff. It looked like everybody was either over-rehearsed or not rehearsed at all, because they seemed to be waiting around, stepping onto their mark, straightening up, and then delivering their line. It was bad, and these lines, like I said, were bad, and I shall read some of them for you. So Jason Statham's character is Hill, and he comes up to the boss character, and the boss character goes, Hill, I'll call you H. And then somebody else is like, H? And then the boss goes, yes, like the bomb. Or, as in Jesus H. There's another thing where he's like moving one of those little cart things that carries the bags of money, and he goes, I like how you handle that cart. Where'd you learn that? Which is a stupid thing to ask anyway. It's this pushing cart. And then Jason Statham goes, I spend a lot of time in supermarkets. Shopping. Okay, was that supposed to be a badass line? Was it supposed to be a funny line? I don't know what it was supposed to be, but it wasn't good. And then even just normal lines, they're delivered so poorly. Like I'm saying, I'm not exaggerating when I say this entire cast, at least for this first section, sucked. Like really, really bad. Jason Statham is supposed to be really good at his job, and everybody's like wowed by him. They're like, how is he so good? And so he's walking in after the first revelation that he's amazing, and everybody's just, giving him praise. And this one guy's like, keep up the good work, soldier. Like, that's not how human beings communicate. But anyway, okay, so that's enough for my notes. I'm gonna leave the notes aside because the rest of this movie is kind of just a gut reaction to this movie, because that's what Guy Ritchie has become. I don't want to say that's how all of his movies are, because like I mentioned with Snatch and Lock, Stock and Sherlock Holmes, all of those three movies to me are legitimately good movies, and they've got good writing, they've got good acting, they've got good directing, they've got good action. All around, those movies are just entertaining and good. You could argue how great they actually are, but they're all at least good across the board. With these more recent movies, even the ones that are pretty good, they have issues in them, and they're just entertainment movies. They're not highbrow, and that's why critics hate them, and I understand why. I hated the start of this movie. I would give that first section like a 3 or a 4. It was painful to watch. I kind of was just thinking that's as good as this is gonna get. This movie's not good. But after this movie took a turn, around the middle, whenever that shift happened, it became so good and kept getting better and better for a while. Near the end, it does kind of drop down in quality level and kind of revert back to the typical outline of the story of just a guy with a gun type thing with Jason Statham, kicking ass. But around that middle section, and it carried on until almost the end, it elevated itself above and beyond anything that I expected from this genre of film. It was a really good plot. It was a really interesting story, and it did things that I wasn't necessarily expecting. And the acting, all the actors that got introduced after this point were so much better than all the other actors. Like, I was wondering, how hard is it to get good actors? And then I guess there was just a shortage of good actors because he wanted to save all of the good ones for the end of the movie and didn't use any of the good ones at the beginning. But it's like Guy Ritchie just really doesn't know how to get off on the right foot with his movies, because they end up pretty good, but they start really bad. Like the first scene of this movie, the setup of this movie would have been a phenomenal scene. It's a camera view, a third eye view in the back of one of those armored trucks as it's going through its station and then getting robbed. And so you're just sitting there in the back as you see the two guards get in, and then they're going about their day, and then they get robbed. And it's all a single shot, uncut, unedited. And I think there was some stuff added in post in the background and obviously visual effects and stuff, but it was for the most part just a clean shot, and it would have been amazing to look at. It would have been so much fun to watch, but it's ruined by this awful wooden acting. It was frustrating to me. It really was. It was hard to watch because you've got these two actors that don't know how to act. They don't even know how to say one line of dialogue, and it's like, where did you find these guys? I feel like you could find better actors at your local theater, like just doing Shakespeare every once in a while. Like these actors were awful. The plot did develop in ways that I wasn't expecting, and it became really interesting. Like I said, it went above and beyond. This genre is so full of tropes. It's so full of boring, pointless things that we've seen a million other times. And this movie threw in a couple of things that reminded you why Guy Ritchie is held with the respect that he is. His name means something, and it reminded you why. I still don't want to say we're going back to the glory days. We're definitely not. This movie wasn't his best. It was top 5 though. It's a shame he hasn't made more good movies because he's wasted his time doing stuff like the Aladdin remake, but hey, this wasn't bad. So I think I'm standing somewhere around like a strong 6.5 to a weak 7. It's somewhere in that range. It's frustrating because if the beginning of this movie wasn't awful and if the end was better, this could have been an 8 based on the plot. Based on everything that happened in this movie, this could have been an 8, which is ridiculous for this type of movie. Like, it's so rare that this type of movie where it's just one guy and a gun versus everybody, those movies generally suck and they're so cheesy. Like, there's barely any that are actually good. Like, Taken is like the outlier where Taken was actually good. It's really hard to name any other movies in this genre that are at all worthy of any praise. Like, they're just all the same thing. They're all just Rambo, or they're all just Die Hard. Oh, Die Hard is good, but you know what I mean, the other Die Hards. It's not like the first one, which was actually good, or the third one. You're talking like Die Hard 5. That's what I come to expect from this genre. This wasn't like that. This was better and could have been a classic if it was just a little bit better in certain small areas. But anyway, so that's what I just had to think overall. That is the spoiler-free version. I am going to get into spoilers now though, so if you don't want anything spoiled, you want to go into this movie blind, then you should click away now. Just make sure to give a like, also share, comment what you think, and if you're new here, subscribe. So yeah, spoilers. So the plot twists in the middle of this movie where you find out who Jason Statham's character really is. I was expecting him to be like an FBI informant or some sort of other like military badass like that. What it turned out to be was that he was actually this crime boss type character who had infiltrated that company to try to find an inside man, because whoever the inside man was had worked with somebody else who had done a armored truck robbery that had resulted in killing Jason Statham's son. So like I said, it's a little bit convoluted here, but it's a fascinating story. It's a fascinating idea that I actually really liked. And so around the middle of the movie, we end up getting a bunch of flashbacks in a row where we're just getting some exposition here, but told through visuals. It's not just somebody telling you what happened, it's showing it all. So like I said, Jason Statham's character's son gets killed, then he goes on a rampage trying to find all of the people that work for his crime syndicate or whatever, and killing everybody that he thinks might be the guy that did it. And then eventually he finds out that whoever it was didn't work for him, so he needs to go work for the company, and then that's how he'll find out who the mole is, and then from there find out who killed his son. And that whole section where he's finding people and beating them up is so good. That was when I immediately went, wait, this movie is amazing at parts. Like, there's this scene where he's walking through this house to go grab a guy and just playing this like remixed version of a Johnny Cash song, and they drag him kicking and screaming, and they have a bag around his head and they're getting ready to torture him. And I was like, this scene was phenomenal. I wish the whole movie was like that. That was awesome. And then there's another great scene where he tracks down these other guys who are also into child pornography, and he kills all of them and then gives the money that they stole and gave it to the girls and then sets them free. And it's like this like crime justice. And then it cuts from there to what almost feels like an entirely different movie, where you've got this group of 6 veteran soldiers who have varying levels of PTSD and decide to move to a life of crime because 1, they do need the money, but 2, they're just itching to get back on a mission, to do something, to plan something and work it out and and, fight people and all of those things. And it's a really fascinating story too. It's another really fascinating element that I loved. And you've got this one character who can obviously tell he's a little more cracked than the rest of them, and he's gonna be the problem, and he ends up being the problem. But even though it's a little predictable, it's not an issue, because actually there's something that was really predictable, I thought at least it was going to be, earlier on in the movie. So you meet this character fairly early on. It's the first character that Jason Statham has to work with, and right away you're thinking he's the bad guy. But then you're like, well, maybe it's reverse psychology because he's so blatantly the bad guy that maybe he's not. And then you start thinking, well, maybe it's double reverse psychology or whatever once you find out that there's a mole, because it doesn't give you any reason to think that there is a bad guy in the armored car company, except for the fact that this guy is acting suspicious. But then you find out that there is a mole, so you're like, oh, so it is him. They just went the obvious route. But then it's not him. It's a completely different character that you weren't expecting. So it went with just your standard reverse psychology, but at least for me, I was a little bit surprised because I was afraid it was going to do a more obvious route or like a double reverse psychology thing, and I'm glad it didn't do that. It went with more of a typical twist, but it was a welcomed one. The problem with the ending of this movie, however, is that it kind of devolves, like I said, back into just a guy beating up a bunch of other people, killing a bunch of people, one man versus the world type thing. So what happens is you've got this group of soldiers turned criminals, and one of them, the guy that's cracked, the guy that's a little out there, he is the one who shot and murdered Jason Statham's son, because they were on a mission that you actually see at the beginning of the movie. It ties everything together really well, and it's really well done. He shot him because his PTSD was just going wild, and like he's just back on in the war zone, basically just shooting everybody that moves. And it's a really emotional plot, and you feel bad for these soldiers in a way, because you know that it's almost like a political thing. They kind of skim over it, but it's like the way that veterans are abandoned and used in this country, it kind of touches on that, but not really. So you feel for these characters, but by the end of the movie, they've all devolved into just basic criminals. As they start getting killed and as they're getting this big payday at the end, they just start betraying each other, stabbing each other in the back, shooting each other, and it's like, I could have accepted if that was the one character doing it, the one bad guy, really bad guy of the group doing it, but they all start doing it where they're each planning to stab each other in the back, and he's the one that comes out on top. And it's just like, I didn't like that. It really devalued these characters. You had written really interesting and creative characters, somebody I was really invested in and interested in, and then you kind of throw it out just because you're like, oh wait, yeah, we're supposed to be doing this kind of movie. This is like too in-depth. This is too interesting for this genre. We need to calm down and do something a little more basic. That's what it felt like. The basic idea is that they are working with the boss from this armored car company. They sneak into the armored car and they get into the holding area where they have all the money from all of the armored trucks, and then they try and steal the money and get out. And Jason Statham goes full Rambo and just kills everybody, despite he dies like twice in this movie. Jason Statham dies twice in this movie, and it doesn't affect him either time. So then eventually he tracks down the bad guy and kills him in a very poetic way. So he has the coroner's report from his son's death, and the coroner went over where each bullet hit him and when, and so then he shoots the bad guy in each location just how he shot his son, and then says, oh, by the way, his name was Dougie, and then shoots him in the heart. And that was a really good scene. That was a fitting end. I enjoyed that. I just wish, like I said, those few things were fixed, because by the end of this movie, I really did enjoy it. I enjoyed this movie. I had a good time. Much better time than I thought I would based on the first, 40 minutes of it. It just makes me wish that that first 40 minutes was watchable, because it was bad. Like I said, that was a 4. And if at the end of the day, I'm giving the entirety of the movie like a 6.5 to a 7, that means that the rest of the movie was pretty good. So I just wish that we had fixed up that beginning, gotten some different actors in there, and then also, like I said, maybe fix that ending too, with having these characters that you had, given life to and really fleshed out and made interesting. You just stole all of that at the end, and you took all of that away, and you cheapened it, and that's unfortunate. But overall, if you are just going to this movie looking for a Jason Statham bloodbath type movie, you're gonna get that, and a little bit more than you bargained for. So I enjoyed it. Wasn't great, wasn't highbrow, but it was After the first 40 minutes, well acted, well written, and an interesting, surprisingly interesting movie. So that's what I thought. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, don't forget to like, share, and if you're new here, subscribe. Thanks, guys. Bye.